Hey, friend, Chris here from MyLogicProRules.com, the website that helps you get the most you can out of Apple's Logic Pro. Welcome to day 28 in our Newbie to Ninja series here on the channel and website, where I'll help you go from being a beginner in Logic Pro to become an expert, fully comfortable and capable to get right down to making awesome music in this amazing application. Today, let's dig into Logic's Step Sequencer, which is hands down one of my favorite features of the app. The Step Sequencer is a software instrument-based editor that allows you to generate repeating musical patterns for your projects. You do this by inputting individual steps along rows within the Step Sequencer that make up perform patterns that your software instruments will then play back. And honestly, it's just a really fun way of creating and making music in Logic. The Step Sequencer proves to be especially handy when working with Drum Machine Designer, which is Logic's included drum machine instrument. But don't be led to believe the Step Sequencer is only for drum production, as it can be used for any software instrument track type in your projects for inputting and programming more pitched and melodic-based performances as well. So let's dig into it. To get started with the Step Sequencer in Logic for your software instrument tracks, there's a couple ways you can go about it. First, by hovering your mouse over an empty section of the track lane for any software instrument track, by right-clicking with a mouse or trackpad, or holding Control and clicking, will bring up a pop-up menu from which you can choose to create a pattern region. Once selected, a pattern region is placed on our software instrument track lane at the location that our mouse was when we made the selection, and the Step Sequencer is automatically opened, allowing us to immediately start inputting individual steps to create a pattern for our software instrument to perform. However, if we close the Step Sequencer by pressing key Command E on our Mac's keyboard, and then select our pattern region and press Delete on our Mac's keyboard to remove this region, we can also just open the Step Sequencer at any time by pressing key Command E while having a software instrument track selected, or by clicking on the editor button in the top of the control bar in the upper left-hand side. Once again, it looks like a pair of scissors. And regardless of the editor that's in focus, whether it be the piano roll, the score editor, or smart tempo, you can just click on the Step Sequencer tab at the top of the editor window. And from there, the moment that you input a step into the Step Sequencer, a pattern region is then created and placed on our software instrument track lane. So as you can see, I've inputted a single step in the kick one row in the Step Sequencer. If I press spacebar on my Mac's keyboard to begin playback, we will hear this kick play back at every bar location in the tracks area. Here we go. Again, the Step Sequencer allows you to generate repeating musical patterns. So even though I've only inputted a single kick drum hit in the Step Sequencer, based on the repeating nature of pattern regions, that's why we're seeing the kick drum at every bar location within the region itself. From here, inputting patterns is as simple as can be. We can just click on individual steps within the Step Sequencer, as well as if we click, hold, and drag our mouse over a series of steps, each of those steps will be enabled as our mouse swipes across them. Let's take a listen to this pattern that I just created by pressing spacebar on our Mac's keyboard to hear it in the tracks area. We can also preview our pattern by itself as we're working on it without any other tracks in our project playing back at the same time, just by clicking on the preview button in the menu bar of the Step Sequencer. So let's give it a try right now as I make some adjustments. You can also use key Command Option and spacebar to begin the preview playback for any editor in Logic Pro. From here, we can extend or reduce the length of a pattern region's pattern just by clicking, holding, and dragging on the boundary of a pattern region to extend the pattern for as long as you need it, or to reduce its length to a particular section. And as with any other region in Logic Pro, we can click, hold, and drag a pattern region to move it. We can hold Option, click, and drag to copy it. We can loop pattern regions, as well as create new pattern regions with their own unique patterns specific to them. All right, let's create a new pattern region and get a closer look at the region itself from bar to bar. We can see our pattern region is made up of a grid of steps, and the steps that we've inputted have been highlighted along the grid. You may have noticed our Step Sequencer pattern is made up of 16 individual steps for each row. This is our pattern step rate, which can be set for both the pattern as a whole as well as for each individual row. We can change the pattern step rate at any time just by clicking and then selecting a new value from the drop-down menu. For example, let's choose eighth notes for our step rate. All right, so we can see some things have changed visually. We can now see in the pattern region there's only 8 columns of steps for each eighth note within the bar. If we take a listen to our pattern, Our pattern sounds slowed down because it's performing at half the time than it was previous. Let's try setting a step rate of 30-second notes. And if we take a listen, and you can see that each of the row step rates are adapting in relation to that of the pattern step rate. So I'll set this back to 16th notes. And let's now set the step rate for the hi-hat specifically for the entire row to that of 8th notes. You can see that the hi-hat individual notes look a little bigger of that of the kick and snare steps. If we set this maybe to quarter notes, they get bigger once again. And if we take a listen, our hi-hat row is now playing at a slower rate as compared to our kick and snare rows. This should be a clue of how interesting and awesome things can get when working with the step sequencer. For example, we can change the playback mode of our pattern as a whole, or once again on an individual row basis. By default, our pattern is playing back from left to right or in a forward motion, but we could choose to have the entire pattern play backwards instead. All right, we've seen some things visually change. Let's take a listen now to our pattern. Well, that's pretty interesting. Let's now have our pattern go back and forth or in a ping pong type of activity. And you can see once again that the hi-hat is slower than the rest of the pattern. Doesn't really matter with this particular hi-hat pattern, but it's interesting to watch nonetheless. We can also choose to have the entire pattern play back randomly, so not at all the way we programmed it. And again, we can set this on a per row basis. We can set the entire pattern to forward while setting the kicks maybe to backward. From there, we can rotate the entire pattern either to the left or to the right. And by that, I mean, if we click on the rotate pattern step right button, we move everything in this pattern to the right one step. Interesting. Let's click again and then take a listen. And we can go to the left as well. And we can see that everything in the pattern is rotating from one end to the other. And of course, we can adjust the rotation on a per row basis. Let's try adjusting the snare this time. However, the fun really starts to kick in with the different edit modes in the step sequencer, with which you can adjust everything, including the individual velocity of each step, have a single step repeat multiple times with note repeat, adjust the chance of a step even being performed using chance. We can tie notes together or change the pitch of a step using note and much more. With velocity and value selected, if we click on the velocity value tab, we now change the view in the step sequencer to show us the velocity of individual steps. And we can see the velocity is consistent for every single step is set to 100. But we can adjust the velocity on a per step basis just by clicking, holding, and dragging to adjust the value. If we just click, that velocity value is set where we clicked. And we can make adjustments. You can also make a ramped adjustment by clicking, holding, and then holding Shift and Option, and then bringing your mouse to the last step in the row. And as we make this adjustment while holding Shift and Option, we can set a ramping effect across every single step in the row. If we take a listen, so it gets quieter at the beginning, louder at the end. So we can set this in a very fine-tuned sort of way if we wanted. Or if we right-click or hold Control and click on a row header, we can choose to randomize the velocity for the entire row. All right, take a listen. There's a lot of opportunity to customize your pattern exactly the way that you want it. If you need a little more resolution for the row, just use key command Control and Z to expand that row so you can make finer adjustments. Let's also try playing around with note repeat, which can be really fun. Click, hold, drag to adjust the value of how many hits will be performed at that particular location. In this case, I've adjusted the snare to that of 3 hits. Take a listen. We'll set this back to 1. And if we adjust the note, check this out. Maybe we can have our hi-hat play at different notes on each hit based on a particular scale if we so choose. Maybe if I set this to C natural minor, and just to save time, let's randomize the note row by once again right-clicking or holding Control and click on the hi-hat row header. If we take a listen, that's actually kind of awesome. I like that. Cool, so we made some adjustments to multiple edit modes now for our hi-hat, and we can choose to see multiple different edit rows at a time by clicking on this arrow on the left-hand side of the row header, with which we now reveal multiple edit rows just for our hi-hat. So if I reduce the view here by using Control-Z, or by adjusting the sizing using the slider, we can now see the velocity edit row, note repeat, note, and octave. And we can see multiple edit rows for even instruments we haven't worked with yet. And once again, just because it's so fun, let's hold Shift and Option, click, hold, and drag to adjust the notes to kind of scale over time in a ramped manner. It really is a lot of fun. And once you're done customizing edit modes, we can go right back to the Step On-Off tab and click to resume inputting and removing individual steps. By the way, if we reduce the view here of our kit, we can see there's a lot of individual drum elements from the 808 Flex kit. But if you don't see a particular drum element in this view, we can go up to the plus button dropdown to see if there are any unused kit items that we could have been using in the step sequencer. So at the moment, we're using every single kit element from the kick down to the different effects. Let's try removing a couple of these just as an example. I'll select a row header and press delete on my Mac's keyboard. And now if we go back up to the plus dropdown, kit pieces, we can choose to add any and all unused kit pieces. At a certain point, you may feel that 16 steps isn't enough for you to execute on the pattern that you have in mind. Well, thankfully, we have this option for pattern length, with which we can choose as few as 12 steps to as many as 64 steps. Now we have a lot more steps that we can work with in the single pattern region. In fact, we have to page through 2 pages to see all 64 steps. And depending on the width that we've set for each page, in this case, we could see up to 4 pages. So check it out. Let's click on page 2, and let's change some things. All right, so we're seeing some changes within a certain section of our pattern region. We go to page 4 now, and maybe add a couple kick hits, remove this one. Maybe we'll set everything to 30-second notes. Get rid of a couple of these. Now things get quite interesting. All right, let's swap out our current beat with something a little more straightforward. To do that, let's go to the Show Hide Pattern Browser button in the step sequencer. And when we click, we get something very similar to the library in the step sequencer. With the pattern browser, we can choose to swap out the current pattern for one of the included patterns with Logic Pro. All right, so now the pattern has been switched. We only see rows for the kit pieces that are in use, as are reflected in the pattern region itself. And if we take a listen, all right, let's go ahead and mute the ride just because it's a little overbearing. And if we made any sort of changes to this pattern and we like those changes, we could choose to save our own user pattern or template. So I'll add my initials to the title. If we navigate through, we have our user patterns that have now saved. Additionally, there's a local inspector for the step sequencer that allows us to adjust a lot of the same controls we've been working with, from pattern length to that of the step rate, playback mode, but we can also introduce some swing or work with the pattern key and scale quantize. For example, if we added maybe 80% swing, all right, pretty cool. I'll set the swing back to 50%. And again, because we're only seeing about 6 different kit pieces from this 808 kit, if we click on the new row drop-down menu with the icon that's a plus, we can choose to add our unused kit pieces. All right, so now we get the full view of the entire kit. I'll press Command and Z on my Mac's keyboard to undo. But as it turns out, there's actually 2 different types of rows in the step sequencer, and that is a note row, which in this case is for different drum notes, but we also have rows for automation that we can introduce. Going back to the new row dropdown, we can select under automation all the different controls for all our different plugins, as well as the instrument itself. Or we can quickly assign an automation row just by clicking on this learn option for either add or assign. So in this case, let's open the channel EQ, and I'll choose to automate this low pass filter's frequency. So if we go back right here, I'll move the plugin and choose to add, and then click on the low pass frequency in the channel EQ. Now have an automation row for our high cut frequency. All right, now we can start to adjust the high cut. So check it out. We can enable a step for every step in the sequence by clicking on the increase step values, or we can remove all these different values by clicking decrease. From here, we'll go to the edit mode and click on velocity/value. From here, we can adjust the frequency of the low cut filter just by clicking on the individual step values. And we can adjust all these values together as one for any type of edit mode. And once again, if we click and hold, and then hold Shift and Option, go to the end, we can set a ramping effect for our high cut frequency across the entire performance. So now if we take a listen and a look, next, let me show you the pattern live recording option that allows you to literally play in a performance into your pattern region. Based on the live record options that are set in the functions menu, when I begin playback, I can start inputting notes using a controller or the musical typing. And at the moment, any performed velocity and note length will be included in the recorded performance into the step sequencer, and all notes will be quantized as well. Let's give it a try. And look at that, we've now populated this entire performance with these 2 notes. Okay, I want to give myself a little more room to be able to lay down an idea. I'm also going to set these steps to that from 16 to 32. Now let's give it a try. All right, so now we've tapped in 4 different notes across this performance. And again, the velocity is maintained because I'm using the musical typing. The note length has been recorded based on how long I held the notes, and every note has been quantized to the grid, but we could choose to turn any of these off at any time. Right, so let's give it another try. All right, I kind of did that on purpose just so you can see that we have multiple notes now for a bass performance that really should just be a single note at a time. Thus, we're going to enable mono mode. And mono mode is great because if we perform or input a step on the step sequencer at any location where there's already an active note, those active steps are taken out of the equation and our new step replaces those other active steps. Especially helpful when working with something like this, like an 808. And lastly, if you're done working in the step sequencer and wish that you could work more in the standard piano roll type of setting, you can right-click on a pattern region or hold Control and click. And from the pop-up menu, you can go down to Convert to MIDI region. All right, now we can open this performance in the piano roll. And it goes in the other direction as well. If we right click on a MIDI region and go down to convert, we can convert a MIDI region to a pattern region. And there you have it. Many, many details when it comes to the step sequencer, but there's so much you can do with this awesome editor. Thanks so much, and I'll see you for more tomorrow in our Newbie to Ninja series. Take care.